Welcome back to Notes of Curiosity, exploring ideas that matter. You know how much we love to tackle the big questions here, and today we're diving into one that's both mind-bending and honestly kind of personal.
Oh, this one hits close to home.
It does, yeah. It's Ilya Prigogine's The End of Certainty, and it really gets to the heart of how we understand time, the universe, maybe even free will.
Prigogine was a Nobel Prize-winning chemist, but this book goes way beyond beakers and Bunsen burners.
Right, he's basically saying those nice, neat laws of physics, the ones we think govern everything, well, they might not be the whole story.
What I find fascinating is how Prigogine starts with these huge philosophical questions, like that classic dilemma. If the universe is like a giant clock ticking along predictably, how can we possibly have free will?
Oh my gosh, I used to think about that all the time as a kid, like staring up at the stars and wondering, is everything already set in motion, like a movie reel just playing out?
Exactly. And Prigogine actually calls this the Epicurean Dilemma. Even ancient Greek philosophers were wrestling with this, right?
Yeah, like Epicurus. Trying to figure out how choice fits into a world made of atoms just bouncing around according to fixed laws. But then science marches on, and you get guys like Newton.
With those beautifully elegant laws of motion. But they're also kind of deterministic, aren't they?
Totally. If you knew everything about a system at one point in time, you could theoretically predict its entire future.
Prigogine even quotes Laplace, who said that a being with enough intelligence could basically see the past and future of the universe just from knowing where all the particles are and how fast they're moving.
But that feels so, I don't know, sterile. Where's the room for surprise, for creativity, for our choices actually making a difference?
And that's precisely Prigogine's point, that this classical deterministic view just doesn't line up with how we experience the world. We feel like we make choices, we see new things happening all the time. It's not just a predictable replay.
And then there's the whole time moving forward thing. We know things go from order to disorder. You spill your coffee, it doesn't magically unspill itself. That's entropy, right?
Right. And entropy is key here because it introduces this arrow of time. Things flow from the past to the future. But here's the catch-check, that all those fundamental laws of physics that supposedly govern everything, they're time reversible, they work the same forwards and backwards.
So it's like two sets of rules, one where time matters and one where it doesn't.
That contradiction bothered scientists for a long time. In the 19th century, you had Boltzmann trying to reconcile these ideas by saying we need to look at systems statistically.
So with trillions of particles, you can't keep track of every single one, so you start talking about probabilities.
Exactly. But a lot of Boltzmann's critics were like, wait, are you saying the arrow of time is just due to our ignorance? If we could track every atom, time would become reversible again.
I can see how that's tempting to think. Like maybe it's just our limited perspective making it seem like time flows one way.
But Prigogine takes a different stance. He builds on those statistical ideas, saying that probability isn't just a convenient tool, it's actually baked into the laws of the universe themselves.
So instead of a predetermined universe, we have one where chance plays a role, where things could have turned out differently.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of Prigogine's most mind-blowing concepts, deterministic chaos.
Ooh, chaos theory. Isn't that whole butterfly effect thing? Tiny changes having massive consequences down the line.
That's it. Prigogine points out that even with fixed laws, they can be incredibly sensitive to initial conditions. A little change here can lead to a huge difference there.
It's not randomness, but rather systems where predictability breaks down. So even if we did know the position and velocity of every particle, the future would still be uncertain.
Precisely. And that's where instability comes in, right? Like a pencil balanced perfectly on its tip, the slightest nudge will topple it.
And those tiny changes we talked about, they get amplified over time. So it's not just about knowing more, it's about the system itself being inherently unstable.
Exactly. And Prigogine argues that this instability isn't some weird exception. It's everywhere in nature. Weather patterns, ecosystems, even how our brains work. It's woven into the very laws governing the universe.
So we have to move beyond those traditional frameworks of classical and quantum mechanics. Not that they're wrong, but that they don't tell the whole story.
That's Prigogine's point. They describe an ideal world that doesn't quite capture the complexity of the universe we actually live in.
So if they need an overhaul, what would that even look like?
That's where things get really interesting. Prigogine says we need to incorporate instability, probability, and time's arrow right into the laws themselves. Shift from thinking about trajectories, those neat paths things follow, to probability distributions where things are always in flux, always changing.
So the universe isn't a finished product, it's a work in progress. Wow. But what does that mean for those big questions we started with? Free will, the meaning of it all.
That's exactly where we'll pick up in the next part of our dip dive. And trust me, Prigogine doesn't shy away from those big implications.
I'm hooked. Can't wait. To our listener, buckle up because we're just getting started.
Welcome back. So last time we were starting to get into how Prigogine really challenges that classic view of the universe as a deterministic clockwork, right? Moving more towards embracing instability and probability.
Right. And it seems like those fundamental laws of physics, the ones we rely on so much, they might need some major rethinking to account for this whole arrow of time thing. And the fact that the universe just seems to keep getting more complex.
Yeah, Prigogine's not saying those laws are wrong, but maybe they're just incomplete. Those classical and quantum frameworks work really well for stable systems. But the universe we live in, it's anything but stable.
Which brings us to one of the coolest, but maybe trickiest ideas in the book. Self-organization. I'll admit this one took me a couple reads to really get.
Yeah, it's definitely mind-bending, but it's also really profound. He uses self-organization to describe how order and complexity can just emerge. From systems that seem totally chaotic, imagine a bunch of scattered puzzle pieces suddenly assembling themselves into a finished picture.
Wait, that's like defying the laws of physics, right?
Yeah.
And common sense.
It seems that way. But it's kind of what happens in nature all the time. Think about a snowflake. It's this incredibly intricate, symmetrical structure, but it forms spontaneously, just from random water molecules. Or think about those crazy swirls and patterns you see in a hurricane.
It's like the universe is this artist who loves to create intricate patterns out of chaos. But how? How do we go from that disorder to these complex structures?
Well, Prigogine says that self-organization comes directly from those irreversible processes, the ones that drive the arrow of time. He actually says irreversibility is the source of order in nature. It's not just about things falling apart, but also about them coming together in unexpected ways.
So time's arrow isn't just about decay and entropy. It's also like a creative force. That's kind of a beautiful way to think about it.
Right. And it goes against our usual intuition, doesn't it? We think order needs to be imposed from the outside, like someone tidying up a messy room. But Prigogine is saying that order can arise spontaneously from within the system itself, driven by those tiny fluctuations, those instabilities.
Oh, so those Poincare resonances we talked about earlier, those points where the smallest change can lead to huge effects, those are crucial for this whole self-organization thing.
Absolutely. He even describes them as the seeds of time. They're the points where irreversibility comes into play. Remember, those classical laws describe systems with smooth, predictable trajectories. But in a world with Poincare resonances, those trajectories get all disrupted. They become more like a branching tree. Lots of possibilities.
So it's not just about chance. It's about these specific points where the system goes unstable. And that's where those probabilities can really take over and send things in completely new directions.
Exactly. And this is where Prigogine proposes this huge shift in how we understand physics. He says, instead of focusing on those individual trajectories, we need to focus on probability distributions. Instead of this particle will be at this point at this time, it becomes, what's the likelihood of finding it in this region?
So ditch the neat equations and find a way to deal with probability. And the fact that everything's constantly in motion seems pretty complicated.
It is, but Prigogine argues that it's necessary if we really want to understand a universe that can create stars, galaxies, even life. He writes, the universe is far from equilibrium. It is a universe full of irreversible processes, of instabilities and fluctuations, and those are the things that make it creative, unpredictable.
I'm definitely seeing the world differently now. Everywhere I look, it's this dance between order and chaos, between stability and change. And it's all driven by time's arrow.
That's one of the most powerful ideas here. Prigogine makes us see the world not as static, but as this dynamic, evolving process where time plays an active role.
But if the universe is this messy, unpredictable system, how can we even make sense of it? Does this mean that science itself is doomed to always be uncertain?
That's a fantastic question, and it leads us right into the heart of what Prigogine calls the end of certainty.
Okay, let's get into that. To our listener, stay tuned for part 3, because things are about to get even more interesting. Okay, so we're back, and ready to tackle this end of certainty. Sounds kind of ominous, but also kind of exciting.
It is a bit of both. Prigogine isn't saying we can't know anything about the universe, more that our knowledge is always going to be incomplete, always evolving. And that's not a bad thing. It means there's always more to discover.
So instead of clinging to these neat, perfect models, we have to embrace a more I don't know, messy view of science.
In a way, yeah. And this is where Prigogine's whole reframing of time is so important. Remember, in classical physics, time is just a parameter, kind of a backdrop.
Right, like a stage where the events are happening.
Exactly. But Prigogine says that's too simplistic. He says, time is not a measure of change. It is the agent of change.
Whoa, time as an agent. So it's not just that things change over time, but that time itself is somehow driving those changes.
That's the idea. He's suggesting that time has a directionality, an arrow. And it's not just an emergent property, it's built into reality itself.
And this is where those Poincare resonances come back in, right? Those little instabilities that mess up the neat trajectories and make new things possible.
Precisely. He sees those as the points where irreversibility enters the picture, where time's arrow takes hold. He even writes, the existence of these resonances means that the future is no longer determined by the present.
So instead of everything being set in stone, we've got a universe where new things can pop up, where the future is open with possibilities that weren't there before.
Exactly. And that has huge implications for how we think about ourselves, about our place in the universe.
Okay, well, let's talk about those implications, like free will. If the universe isn't a deterministic machine, does that mean we actually have choices?
It's the question philosophers have been arguing about forever. But Prigogine gives a new perspective. He's saying if the universe is inherently unpredictable, if novelty and creativity are built into it, well, then there's room for real choice.
So in a way, the arrow of time actually opens up the space for free will. It's like those branching paths we were talking about, the ones created by the resonances. They give us options, different routes to take.
That's a great way to put it. It's not that the universe is random, but that it's open to new possibilities. And that openness is what allows for creativity, for us to be more than just cogs in a machine.
Okay, that is really empowering. But it also makes me think about responsibility. Like, if our choices do matter, if we're not just puppets of fate, then we have this obligation to make choices that lead to a better future.
You've hit on a really crucial point. Prigogine says that this new view of the universe isn't just about science, it's about ethics, too. He writes, the future is not given. It is something we create through our actions. If the universe is evolving, we're all part of that. We're not just along for the ride, we're shaping what happens.
This has been an incredible journey through some truly mind-bending stuff. I gotta say, I'm leaving this deep dive feeling both humbled and kind of inspired. Like, wow, the universe is vast and complex, but we also have a role to play in it. That's amazing.
That's the beauty of Prigogine's work, isn't it? It doesn't give you all the answers, but it invites you to embrace the mystery, keep asking questions, and realize that the universe is way more amazing than we often imagine.
Absolutely. And to our listener, if you're ready to shake up how you think about time, the universe, even reality itself, we highly recommend checking out The End of Certainty. It's one of those books that sticks with you, and it might just change the way you see the world.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time, ready to explore another fascinating part of the universe.